this is interesting because I've never had this topic or conversation on this on the podcast before, but
I had a bit of a leg up, I think, compared to a lot of my other friends in that I'd experienced a lot. I'd almost died a number of times.
We talk about personal responsibility, self-reliance, choosing the road less traveled, because you do have to look in the mirror, and almost any problem you have is going to come down to the person staring back at you at some point.
I mean, that's one of my top favorite books of all time.
Like, what do you hope people get out of it? What do you hope that when they get that book, what do you hope that it does for them?
They represented this much of culture 30 years ago, and I think that they represent about this much of culture now.
It's our responsibility as parents to look in the mirror and say, hey, I got to probably do something different instead of saying it's everybody else's fault. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Sean Moore. We're back with our Experts Corner interviews, and I'm really excited about our guest today on Experts Corner. We've got an author of one of my favorite books. It's called The Code of the West Manual. It's a frontier guide to modern living. We've got the author, Mr. Chris Hunt, joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about a lot of stuff, right? And so, Chris, I appreciate you joining me today on the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, I always like to start just with a backstory, right? Sometimes it's nice to get to know who we're talking to. I think that there's a lot of different, you've got a pretty diverse background. I definitely want to talk about the book. It goes into a lot of the things that we talk about here at Odyssey, and really about choosing that disciplined, rugged way of life that's really connected to that personal responsibility, self-reliance, going out and making things happen for ourselves. And what I really was attracted to you in the message that you're putting out, but there's got to be a backstory from all that stuff. Like, where does that all come from? Take me back a little bit to what got you to where we're at today of writing some of these books, getting involved in some of that stuff. And then we'll kind of see where that conversation goes.
Yeah. Like I was saying before we started, I have a bit of an odd origin story, and so I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. But a lot of who I am, I can trace back to really early memories of my life. I was kind of at the forefront of the bubble kids as an elder millennial, where allergies and asthma and all these things were kind of like not well understood at the beginning. And so life for me for the first like 5-6 years of my existence was sort of like, let's just see what's going to try to kill Chris today. And it would be like, my grandpa would throw me in a pile of leaves, and I'd be like, loving it. And then like, I'd get out and look like a tomato that had swollen up. I got hives for 6 months on the back of my legs from sitting on, used to be, airplane seats were made with wool. And you could smoke on airplanes at that time too, which was even great for my asthma. So my mom at a really early age kind of had to put this awareness into me of like, hey, I'm not going to always be around. You're going to have to sort of self-assess what's going on, and in order to not die, basically. And through those early years, I did not like the idea of being sick, but it's kind of like growing up poor when you don't know that you're poor. It's just, you just sort of work around it, and you kind of do your thing, but I wanted to, like, I was obsessed with Teddy Roosevelt in an early age. And of course he had asthma, and he just basically just willed himself to not have it. But there was something really inspiring to me as a little kid about the East Coast sick kid that terrible circumstances under which he eventually went west, but who just sort of was unwilling to accept completely, like, carte blanche, that there was nothing that he could do to change his existence and his physicality. And so I don't know, I kind of had these ideas of going west and just not necessarily defaulting to a framework at a very young age, that just because this is what I've been given, this is what I have to accept.
Yeah. Was it, when you say I had these ideas of going west, that was was it like literally going west? Did you grow out
literally
like,
west,
live out on the east? Yeah. And so going west, but also was that new possibility, like the untamed, like the frontier, right? Back in the day of saying, I'm trying to get away from this box that I'm living in and go figure out this new life. Right. And so
Mhm.
for you, you were saying I'm going to literally go do that same thing.
Yeah. So born in Ohio, but my dad, biological dad, he's a truck driver, was a truck driver over the road. And every summer, pretty much, I mean, my earliest memories are actually San Jose, California and Santa Cruz and places like that. But from like 4-ish to about 8, 9, every summer I'd go on the truck with my dad for a few, like sometimes like a month. And so I just saw everything. And I remember seeing the Rockies for the first time, like getting out of the plains and going through the Mojave on our way to San Jose. Like there was just something about it that just, I could just sense, like my brain felt better seeing a horizon than it did staring at like a skyline. And I was also, this is a part of the origin story, but because I was sick, I had ear infections. Because I had ear infections, I didn't learn how to speak properly. I was effectively deaf when I was supposed to be learning how to speak. So when I was supposed to be reading or learning how to read, I had to go to a deaf school to learn how to talk. So when I was in first grade, I had a first grade teacher who told my mom that he just can't read. He's never going to learn how to read. He's probably not going to graduate high school. So my family, we were living with my grandma and grandpa Rayleigh, who were my mom's parents at that point. I came home crying because my grandpa had a basement full of books like Louis L'Amour and Kenneth Roberts. I don't know if you ever, a lot of historical fiction and things about like the Revolution and the frontier as it went from like, Ohio and then, Kansas, Missouri on. And I just innately knew that there was something in those books that I needed and that I wanted access to. And the idea of not being able to read, because my grandpa was a voracious reader, just bothered me. So that's a whole different tangent, but I eventually learned how to read clearly. And I became obsessed with the West and those kinds of stories and the hero's journey. But I also just became obsessed with narrative writ large. Like there was some, you ever seen the movie Smokey and the Bandit?
Yeah.
Okay. Dad had a copy of Smokey and the Bandit that I would watch going down the road in the back of the Kenworth. We went to the Louisville truck show one time, and Jerry Reed was there. And in my mind, as like a 6-year-old kid, I experienced Smokey and the Bandit as if it were like a document of a truck driver, like not as a movie about truck drivers. And so when I met Jerry Reed, I thought Jerry Reed was Cletus the Snowman. And so I don't know if this is right or wrong, but narrative just seemed like how I processed the world basically. And that's how so once I got access to it, I was just off to the races.
I love it. And I love like and so when you start to, you feel like, okay, I won, I'm struggling. Like I'm being told that I can't read and write. I'm not going to be able to do this, which is hard because that takes you back into that box. Right. Which now all of a sudden we're like, hey, I'm going, there's this big wide world out there and a big wide world of possibilities. You come out West and there's a lot of open spaces, a lot of these like right. When you're riding in that truck, you're like, man, there's just hundreds and hundreds of miles of nothing. Right. And it's just nature and it's whatever, environment you're in, whether it's the desert, whether it's the mountains, whether it's the high desert, all these different environments that you're driving through. But it also sounds like in your mind, it's like this new world of possibilities. Like, hey man, everybody in this old world's telling me I can't do these things. Out in this new world, maybe I can make my own decisions. Maybe I can make my own life. Maybe I can do my own things. It kind of sounds like that's at least for you, that was where that direction was headed. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah. I mean, and that's such a pivotal aspect of the romanticized version and the somewhat less, smooth around the edges reality of Manifest Destiny is that whether people did it responsibly or not, it was an opportunity to start over. And I think that it was viewed as that, it was a blank slate for the people who weren't already there.
because you've got, a lot of your background is in illustrations, right? And you're an illustrator and a cartoonist, and you do a lot of illustrations. When I looked at some of your kind of background and seeing what you're doing, did that start before the writing started, like where you could just draw out kind of your thought process on this stuff, or when you were young, like when did that pick up, like that creative side of illustrating versus really articulating through writing?
So this might be a little boring or woo-woo of an answer, so I apologize to your listeners. But I'm not what people think of the cliche artist as. So for me, the only way I can visualize something is to structure it in language first, and I learned that about my brain pretty early. So to answer that part of the question specifically, I'd say they're pretty much the same thing. Like I recognized at a pretty early age, after just because I basically was reading to prove that first grade teacher wrong. Like I like and to get personal pan pizzas from Pizza Hut. But the amount of information and the things that I was reading were well beyond what not like an inappropriate amount of like violence or descriptions of things, adult themes. It's just more that like when you lack a context, it's kind of like pointless to some degree. But because I knew I lacked the context, I was trying to build frameworks in my mind to try to like project and understand and sort of hypothesize what these stories that were beyond me might mean. And so I would say my creative juices, and it's frustrating at times for people, especially when like I've been their boss at Black Rifle, where, they just want to be artists. They just want to do things. Yeah. And it's like, that's all well and good to a degree, but cognitive sovereignty is the ability to understand the frameworks that you operate within, in my opinion. And the only way to understand those frameworks, or for those frameworks to really be of your construction rather than, something that has been placed upon you by society or culture or the people around you, is that you got to sit down with language and construct your thoughts. You can't, without language, it's just gobbledygook.
Yeah. And it's just an interpretation, right? Because if it's without the language to really put some context around what you're seeing or whatever, it's just up to interpretation.
Yeah. If somebody jumps out at a dog and scares him, the dog doesn't go in language, "Oh, my word, that was startling to see that human come around the corner." The dog just has a chemical reaction of adrenaline and anxiety and other things that are happening to it, that it can't actually, unfortunately, for the dog, can't articulate anything. It just has to experience what has happened to it.
That's it's interesting when you start to because you're really trying to you're painting this picture of how this is for you as a young man, and you're coming out west and you're building this new life and doing all this stuff, and then you get enamored with all these stories, the heroes of the West, the villains of the West, the code of the West, right? Kind of the unwritten rules and the unwritten laws. And you're putting all this together. And then at some point you thought, hey man, this is pretty applicable to today's day and age too, right? There's a lot of things that we can apply and take from those, those old stories and those old, the basically that frontier guide and manual and living, the code, and apply it to today. And it's interesting. We were talking about before we hit record is, I found you online. I repost your stories nonstop on my story. I'm not a huge Instagram guy or social guy. I'm the guy that wants to just kind of disconnect from that stuff at times. But I realize as a business owner and as somebody that is out there putting content out, it's also part of how we get our message out and a part of how you do it. But a lot of things you talk about are getting people offline, and
Correct.
We repost that stuff all the time. And you do a good job of articulating and taking those frameworks of those old, the stories, the villains, the heroes, the code, and applying them to today's life, the choices we make, the roads that we're going to run down, and kind of choosing that road less traveled. Talk to me a little bit about that, because it's a little bit like you said, we kind of have to play both sides of the coin a little bit of how much are we going to just sit online, and like you mentioned before, we're not, and I'll let you articulate it better than I will, but our brains really aren't prepared for this onslaught of technology that we've been, really, just fast forwarded through over the last decade. And it's really addicting. It's really, in my opinion, damaging. And so really trying to use it, but also use it to be aware to get off of it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think that I was 18, 19 when Facebook popped up, and I was paying to go to college at the time, so I was able to log in. But unlike every other point in the 20th century, and really most of the centuries prior to that, like there were frameworks and manners, social constructs around most basic behavior that would it would evolve over time. But it's like, maybe the difference was take your hat off when you sat at the dinner table, and no one cared about that 300 years ago. But there was things that tethered this sort of social contract together based on manners and social contracts of, it's just like, how do you get along, without without wanting to kill each other. And the internet popped up as social media, I should say, and there were no rules. Me as an 18-year-old kid, like my parents at first didn't even want to acknowledge that something like Facebook existed. And so we were left literally to our own devices to figure out what the right way to do this was. And I would argue that we never did. And that essentially what happened was we found ourselves on a digital lazy river and just have decided to lay back and see where it takes us for the most part. And so but that being said, because of where I was at my age when social media emerged, I saw it as this great connector and this opportunity to share ideas and connect people. And it's just like anything, it has to do with how you use the tool. And I think intention and effort and self-awareness is you basically need a cognitive firewall, essentially, to engage with social media. Like you need to have an awareness of this is not okay. Like that. If, for instance, people talk about, and this is a part of my thesis for starting Code of the West, actually, everybody's like, social media is toxic. Social media is toxic. I looked into it a little bit because this is when I was still a Black Rifle. At this point in time, the feeds were being curated by algorithms based on the tastes of the operator or like the person consuming, which is to say, those algorithms were pushing you towards extreme versions of the things that knew you liked to keep you on the platform. But the point is, if you're looking at a toxic feed, somewhere in that process, you played a part in that. Yeah. And so I think there's a bit of an accountability part that people don't necessarily understand. And then also just stepping back and saying, like, this is not like Facebook or Meta or YouTube just saying, like, let's radicalize everybody on earth. It's like it's a dumb, smart algorithm that just wants to keep you on its platform to sell you some ads.
Yeah.
If that is what's hijacking humanity, like, that's pretty scary. That on one hand, it's scary, but on the other hand, it's like, well, that's pretty simple. Just be aware of the fact that it's doing it to you.
Yeah. It's just, it's built to feed your own bias. Right. And that's all it continues to do. So if your bias is the wrong bias or a toxic bias, and you're getting fed a lot of really toxic stuff and you are consuming it, you're right. There is a personal responsibility there as well. I totally agree. And this is where this is interesting because I've never had this topic or conversation on this on the podcast before, but like, I'm a parent, right? I've got kids that are, 12, 13 years old. They just turned 13. I've got twins, they're teenagers, and all their friends are on social. We don't allow them to have social accounts, right? Because sometimes those kids, you're gonna explore a whole bunch of different biases. You're gonna explore all kinds of different stuff. You're gonna click on all kinds of different things, and that's where I think the responsibility comes to as parents to say, hey, I do want to shield my kids from certain things because that algorithm is so effective of feeding certain content and biases. And with kids, many times they don't pick the right thing, right? Sometimes they're going to explore options that maybe, we don't necessarily want them fed a whole bunch of that stuff.
But on the flip side, well, it's not really a flip side. It's just to reinforce that if they don't have a cognitive firewall before or after, not like say they're 13 now, you can just not buy them a phone. At some point they can afford to buy their own phone. If that firewall or that framework, whatever you want to call it, doesn't exist yet,
yes,
it's just still going to run roughshod on a brain. And so I think that's part of this idea of like the digital 21st century. I don't see the code really as like, oh, it's a cowboy thing. It existed 200 years ago. Let's just sort of like, and just throw it over the fence to 21st century. I think as a structured framework of thinking, you could take this to the 30th century if you want to, and it's going to be future proof because it's just saying, be aware, don't be an a-hole, like, and sort of self-diagnose rather, what is it that you're being exposed to? Because it's not saying like be a closed gate, don't let anything in. It's just that like be deliberate about what you open the gate and let in. And I think that's the thing that we weren't prepared for. I wasn't prepared for as an 18-year-old kid necessarily in the digital. I was prepared in the sense that like I was a pretty libertarian like high school kid that was like basically like Ron Swanson before a mustache emerged. And I was very mindful of sovereignty and personal sovereignty, and was the kid that was reading like the Federalist Papers and Thomas Paine speeches and that kind of thing. Like very don't tread on me before it was sort of I don't want to say co-opted, but like it's sort of almost like that. That's almost like a clique now online, where like I was just from Idaho, like at that point. But my point though is that I had this sort of like, I had a bit of a leg up, I think, compared to a lot of my other friends in that I'd experienced a lot. I'd almost died a number of times. I didn't take anything for real. I didn't take as much as an 18-year-old kid would take for granted, still did. And there was something that kind of like, it's kind of like the breadcrumbs in the story of the labyrinth, fighting the Minotaur in the labyrinth. Like you got to, or no, it's thread. Like you got to kind of be able to find your way back a little bit. And I think that that's the key for the adults is we got to realize that just because we're like, oh, I don't like the algorithm, I don't like Instagram. If you say that and the first thing you do is pick a fight with somebody when you go on Instagram, I got news for you. It's not Instagram. And so that person's going to model behavior or frameworks to a younger generation. It's not really a framework. It's just a behavioral habit.
Right. And I think it goes down to, and that's what I love about the code is really having these guidelines and these sets of kind of rules. And a lot of it is, let's look in the mirror and see what responsibility that person staring back at us has. Right. And I think that's where we always talk about. So we talk about personal responsibility, self-reliance, choosing the road less traveled, because you do have to look in the mirror, and almost any problem you have is going to come down to the person staring back at you at some point. The decisions you made, the choices you make, the choices have consequences. And you've got to be exposed to other things. You've got to be able to say yes and no to things. You're right. Like with my kids on social, it's like at some point they've got to be exposed to it to be able to have.
You got to stress test. You got to stress test what you believe.
Yeah, exactly. Just say, hey, listen, this is going to work. Have you ever, curious on this, have you read the book, Outwitting the Devil? Have you ever heard of that book by Napoleon Hill?
No, because I was going to ask you if you've read the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, because I'm curious now how these might relate to one another.
So Outwitting the Devil is really, so yes, I have read Think and Grow Rich.
Okay.
I love the book. So after Napoleon Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich, the Great Depression came and he was feeling like a failure. He lost everything. His fortune was gone. And he just wrote this big self-help book, one of the, on helping people get rich. And he felt like a fraud because now he's broke. And he had a conversation. The book is a conversation he had with the devil, and how the devil can, if we've all got free will and choices, and and we can take personal responsibility, how does the devil infiltrate into this? And it was this. The book is written as it's a two-way conversation with him and the devil, and the rule is he can ask the devil any question, and the devil has to answer, right? And it has to be truthful. And they have this big conversation. It's all recorded. It's very, very interesting. And at the end of the book, the devil says, okay, now that you know all of my secrets, and if you publish this book, there's going to be dire consequences to you, your family, everything else. Well, Napoleon Hill never published the book. It went into his
Wait,
foundation.
this really was Napoleon Hill that wrote the book?
Yeah, it's a true book. And
I just randomly said that because that was in my head, Napoleon Hill. That's crazy that I was thinking about a Napoleon Hill book.
Yeah, no, that is. So Napoleon Hill really did write this book and the one I'm telling you about. I think you'll find it fascinating.
Oh, and yeah.
So he goes, and this book was never published back in, and then after he passed away, his family wouldn't publish it because basically it was said that they were going to get cursed and everything, right?
Well, you don't want that evil on you.
Yeah. And so it got published by a lady named Sharon Lecter, who is the head of the Napoleon Hill Foundation back in 2012. And it's actually a really, really good book. But it made me think, when you're talking about is the devil talks about drifters and how he gets people to drift in life and not make very intentional, purposeful decisions and choices and all that. And he just gets people in this habit of drifting, right? And kind of letting life happen to them. And that's how he gets people and doing, like, infiltrating into all different kinds of life, politics, school, religion, everything else. Right. And so anyways, I find it's a really fascinating book. Those of you listening, you guys have heard me talk about this a little bit before. If you haven't read this book, go read it. But it's I recommend the audiobook because there's two different voices, one of Napoleon Hill, one of the devil. And you listen to this conversation, and it's a really interesting book, but it's really applicable. I make my kids listen to it because that's the whole point of it, is you have to be exposed to all of these different things. And like you say, you have to stress test, and you have to be able to make decisions, and you have to be able to, stand by your decisions and be able to take responsibility for those choices and the decisions you make, and not become just a drifter in life and letting things happen to you. You have to be intentional about making things happen for you. And sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But it's a really interesting conversation. So yeah, it's called Outwitting the Devil. I'd love you to listen to it. I think you'll find it fascinating.
I will. What's funny is I'm working on the next book right now, and a big part of that is what I've referred to as cognitive drift. In that kind of like what we're talking about, where if you were to say intelligence is relational, meaning that you kind of like going back to the dog thing, if a dog gets startled, it has no ability or reason to articulate its thought because there's nobody for it to talk to. Right. Whereas for us, we have the ability to think outside of ourselves and have language. And so when we I can't remember exactly how it says in the Bible, but it's not so much what goes in, but what comes out. Not what goes, into a man, but what comes out of his heart and his mouth, or something like. I apologize for totally butchering that quote. But because I don't necessarily think inherently ideas in are bad, but garbage in, garbage out, typically. And so, without getting too far into the weeds on it, it's right now, anyways, is that it's more to me when you have a structure or a framework being replaced for you, like scaffolding one floor at a time, as these algorithms are kind of for basically the same reason why people are finding Code of the West is the same thing I'm trying to fight, which is that it knows you well enough to know what you'll like. So if you can proactively go look for the things that are good for you, that helps. That's part of the firewall, is it helps you kind of stay locked in epistemologically to a framework that you agree with. I think when you see, and I don't want to, I'm political in my personal life, but I don't get political as far as Code of the West goes, because to me, it's like an American story. Yeah. And I don't need to get too far down in the weeds on stuff. That's for everybody else to have their opinions on it. I'm very you do you, swing your fist until it hits my nose kind of thing. But
yeah,
but I think people are losing their own personal frameworks, and over time, it's basically when you don't need to articulate things, when something is telling you repeatedly more efficiently, this is what you're into, right? This is who you relate to. This is that idea that we talked about, but just a little bit more extreme. Suddenly your framework's not your framework anymore. And you're just sort of a reflection of something else. And that I think that that's where a drift occurs in modern society in a lot of ways. You call it an ennui, or just make it just as simple as like, it's just, you kind of lose touch with who you are.
Yeah. And it's that confirmation bias, right? Robert Cialdini talks about all the time, and and it feeds that confirmation, but also we are programmed internally that once we kind of make a decision, we stand by it, right? We're naturally going to want to stand by it. Well, when we're fed everything else that supports that idea as well, that confirmation bias just gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and which is a huge problem in society right now, right? Like it's
part of your identity.
It's like, okay, well, I voted for Trump, and because I voted for Trump, everybody else on the other side that didn't vote for Trump hates my guts, or vice versa, right? Somebody that voted for Kamala, everybody, like that's craziness, right? It reminds me of that story of there's a study that they took a bottle of ants, they put 100 black ants in it, 100 red ants in it, and they're perfectly fine in the jar, right? They're living together. They're fine. No problems at all. Well, they come and shake the jar, and they shake the jar really hard. And all of a sudden the red ants think that the black ants are causing the problem, and the black ants think the red ants are causing the problem. And they start fighting each other. They start killing each other, and they start eating each other because they think that each other are the problem. And they always say, maybe your neighbor's not the problem. Look who's shaking the bar. Look who's shaking the jar is the problem, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of how we're fed stuff. Is we're fed to feed our confirmation, but also to shake up, almost to say everything else is wrong as well. And that's a big problem in my opinion.
The tail wagging the dog.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it really interesting, right? To when you start to run down those roads. But your new book that talks about cognitive drift, I think that you're going to find that that conversation with the Napoleon Hill had. I'm
all about that. Napoleon Hill was a huge. It's funny because Napoleon Hill showed up right around the time that I read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, which was also a very, very pivotal book for me, which is also a hotly contested book, even though I find that most of the time the people that don't like that book haven't read it. But that's one of my top favorite books of all time. I've got a $sign tattooed on my chest, actually, because of Atlas Shrugged. Like literally. That's a part of, I think that sort of cognitive bias, the confirmation bias that you're talking about, where it's like, I can say, hey, I read Atlas Shrugged and I really liked it. And there's some people who are going to go, oh, I 100% know this guy, and it's not going to be accurate. And on the flip side, there's going to be like, oh, I know this baby killer. I know what this guy's all about. And it's like, not really. Like, we lost that. Going back to frameworks, don't talk about politics and religion at the dinner table. That was a huge thing for me growing up in Ohio, before we moved out west when I was 9, is that like, I tried to ask my grandparents, like when, I think the first presidential election I remember was Bill Clinton versus Bush Sr. I think that's the right one. Yeah.
Yep.
I remember asking my grandpa, like, so who, because we had a faux election at my elementary school. And I was like, who are you voting for, Grandpa? And as a 6-year-old kid, he's like, not going to tell you, and refused to.
It's his business. Right. And
100%.
That's how it used to be. Right. And I think that, I talk to a lot of people. We travel around a lot with what we do. We do meetups all the time in all different areas, all different walks of life, different backgrounds. We work with a lot of people with different backgrounds. I think like what you said earlier is where 95% of people are, is we all just kind of want to do us. Like, you be you, I'll be me. You do your thing, as long as you don't punch me in the nose by your swinging your fist, right? Everything else is fine. Like, let's just all be and do what we want to do and how we want to do it, and kind of be left alone. And I believe that most people really do believe that, down to the core. And it's sometimes, I think we're led to believe that it's a little bit different than that. And I think that's where the messaging comes in hot and heavy, where it might not be nearly, when you actually get out and you actually hang out with people and you actually talk to people and you're actually around people, you don't see a lot of the things that we're fed online all the time or on the news all the time. And we think that that's the reality. And the reality is, get outside and get out and talk to people and do stuff. And you'll find that we're all pretty similar in what we
I think the same reason why, if you talk to people, if you're a bully online and talk to people the same way that you do online as you do in real life, I can tell you wouldn't last very long in a bar in northern Idaho, for one.
No,
but but I think but you don't have to tell someone not to do that. Typically, that's the funny thing. But say, I went to Portland. I've been going to Portland for the past couple of years just to visit a old friend from Boise, and 2 years ago, I guess it'll be the third year this year, I hadn't been to Portland in a long time. And, I was up here in northern Idaho during COVID, and it seemed like it was pretty bad, in a lot of these big cities, especially like Portland and Seattle and San Francisco. And so I didn't know what to expect when I got to Portland, and everybody I knew kind of in my circle was like, "Oh man, it's going to be terrible. I've seen the photos, I've seen the videos." To be honest with you, Portland was cleaner than it had been in a long time. Like, when I went there, I've been going since I was a pretty young person in my 20s, and Portland's been full of homeless encampments and syringes and people stealing stuff, doing drugs for as long as I've been in my 20s. Doesn't make it right. Just is that that's baseline. Going and visiting my friend Jenny Rice, I was like, Portland's not doing too bad. But if I just listen to, if I listened to the, I'm not saying it was great. It's just that it wasn't Mad Max, I would have been led to believe, and it might have been that way during the height of COVID. I wasn't there. I can't speak to it, but there was still in the zeitgeist this idea of oh, Portland's a hellhole, hellscape that you can't navigate. And it's no, that's pretty okay.
Yeah, it was all right. It's so true though. But that's, I think, what you're trying to do with the Code of the West, right? Put these frameworks, say, hey, listen, let's get out. Let's move away from some of the, just all of that stuff that's fed us in these confirmation bias. So let's, you said that was, you mentioned kind of the first part of your thesis for writing the Code of the West. And then what do you hope people get out of it? What do you hope that when they get that book, what do you hope that it does for them?
The manuals in my mind, the flag in the sand. It's not really the end all be all. It's when I started Code of the West, it was more of I want to go out with my boots on than anything, meaning that I had been participating in culture and on the fringes with comic book, the comic book industry, certainly with Black Rifle. And I was seeing under the hood of a lot of things. I had to deal with Hollywood people in different parts of my career. I had to deal with media. I remember learning for the first time that journalists, very few journalists actually go looking for stories. For the most part, it's placed articles, and things. And I remember being what? How does everybody not know this? We're just reading articles and we're thinking all right, we're going to go down and find the story. And it's no, it's just some dude waiting for someone to cold call him on email, be I got a story for you. X, Y, and Z's happening. And so for me, it was more okay, I'm a weird kind of odd goober head with this weird, because the best way I can put this is, as much as I've loved being a storyteller and an illustrator most of my life, I grew up around truck drivers and construction workers. And I have always struggled with this idea of utility in what I do, because I'm I know what it's like to move 10,000 pounds with somebody else out of a truck, or build a door header, get somebody out of, stuck out in the middle of nowhere. There's a direct utility to that. Whereas telling stories, it's well, I'd say water and food and shelter are probably more important. But as I've gotten older and culture's changed as it has, I suddenly became aware of the tricks, the narrative tricks that I use to tell a comic book story, or I would use to write a story in a book or whatever. I'm like, I'm seeing the pattern. I'm seeing either, and I'm not saying it's just an algorithm. It's more of like this sort of like symbiotic emergence of like a person that's sort of a bad actor understanding that the algorithms can do a certain thing. And it's like a magician who kind of walks the line of like being a pickpocket versus an entertainer.
Yeah.
It's really just comes down to like, are you trying to steal someone's wallet, or are you just trying to like entertain them? Because it's the exact same move to be a pickpocket as it is to be a magician. And so I kind of wanted, I shouldn't say I had this like overwhelming desire and drive to be like, man, I just want to, for my own edification, just put a document out. Or obviously I didn't go straight to a document. I had to kind of figure out how to tell this story and how to brand it, and I had to learn how to use the algorithm to fight the algorithm. And so the manual, I would say, is sort of like a way of having an agreed upon epistemology, where it's like, if I can hand this to you, or you can hand it to the twins, and everybody can read it, we don't necessarily have to agree on it, but we can at least share the language or the framework to challenge it and stress test it. And so that was the first step in what I hope I don't sound like a crazy Machiavellian person here by saying that like, yeah, I wrote a 200-page book and it's just step one. But that is just step one. It's just to lay the groundwork for what I don't 100% have like granularly figured out in the future, but like know that I'm moving towards.
Love it. Yeah. So, but it could be a standalone framework for, I know for me, I love just picking it up and reading certain chapters, right? And
that's why I did that. Like, Rick Rubin had the book.
It is like a manual, right? It's written like you could literally just pick it up and go to the middle of the book and read a chapter on values, or another one on courage or something, right? And we read those different, and I love how that's laid out like that.
It's kind of like a cone. Buddhist cone is kind of how this is the weird thing about me and Code of the West. It's like I grew up doing hard stuff, like I've been like cut man out in the barn with my stepdad, putting ceilings up, and an apartment we've been building. Like I can be the blue collar dude, but then I'll be like, so I have a cowboy brand where I'm writing Buddhist cones as cowboy stories. Like, I'm not taking cones and rewriting them, but that's the idea of the manual. Was I intentionally didn't put chapter headings in, just like you can't go to an index and see everything is. It's like, no, I want you to have to open the book and explore and find it, because this is probably a little bit too social engineering, but like my thinking is, if you got to go find it, you're going to find something else while you're looking for the other thing. Like, and so then I want it to be super easy, nothing more than 2 pages, maybe 3 at times. And that's all very intentional, so that you could just sort of like read it, sit down, and just go write about it or think about it, and not that like it's a here's a system, but it's like it's meant to be used like with a journal. And so that, that's part of like where I've been starting to put this whole thing together, where it's like, okay, I've got Code of the West journal. I've got a Code of the West manual, which is more of like the Rosetta Stone. And so then in the future, it's like, I don't know, because I love I do like Tony Robbins as well, which is going to be kind of funny, given like it's a Western inspirational website or media company. But I think that Tony Robbins is somebody who is in a long line of people that's sort of holding the flame of a Napoleon Hill, because you have like Earl Nightingale, and then there's a couple people, names I can't remember, from the 70s and 80s. And then you got Tony Robbins emerging in 80s and 90s, and obviously still relevant now, but they're still kind of trying to optimize frameworks for things that I think were they represented this much of culture 30 years ago, and I think that they represent about this much of culture now in terms of like the frameworks that are needed to navigate the 21st century. Still, all that's still relevant. It's more just like, if Tony Robbins is doing this, it's still important, but all of that now has to be able to go up against algorithms and, giant corporations and, investment firms like Blackstone. Like, I mean, it's not to get all tinfoil hat. It's a complex world, and you have to just have a simple system that can deal with. It's like the Constitution. It's going to have to be. It has to be simple enough that it's adaptable enough as you go through unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah, and having the ideas or some of those things as a system or a foundation or a framework that you can apply how you're going to apply it, basically, right? Whether it's when you're navigating certain decisions, doing certain things, and because it is a complex world, and sometimes it's just nice to have a simple, foundational type of codes that you can reference to and say, yeah, this is important. And I want to be aware of that when I'm navigating this other road or navigating this other decision, or, as I barrel through life and try to figure this whole thing out. And that's why I love this conversation. That's why I like the manual. And I got that on my copy right here. You guys that are watching on YouTube, right? Code of the West, the Code of the West manual. And you can get it on Amazon, but like you're right. Like, you just pick it up, and that's what I do with this. I literally have never read it cover to cover, but that's cool. I probably read all of them a number of times because I go through and I just pick up, like you said, 3 or 4 pages here or 3 or 4 pages there based on the thing that I'm thinking about at that time of the day, or the thing that I'm trying to navigate. And, and sometimes just to get reassurance, other times to get different ideas. And I think that's, it sounds like that was your idea for the book.
100%. I mean, like I didn't write it for young people necessarily, but I have experienced, through like working at Black Rifle, and then certainly now with the page, as much growth as it's experienced in the past year, have heard from a number of people that are in whatever. I mean, I think there's even a generation behind Gen Z now, but like, let's say like the youngest Gen Z kids. Not everybody's lucky to have someone, like you as a dad, and there's a lack of generational knowledge. I'm not blaming anybody. I think the generalizations are terrible but unavoidable. But I do think that we're in a cycle right now where you had a couple generations ago were just real concerned about their own what they were going to get. The baby boomers, and I know that I know your bread and butter is probably. We don't want to alienate anybody, as far as vacation homes or anything.
But also, again, look in the mirror, right? Let's figure out what what it is, right? I always find it, like when people have kids nowadays, they want to blame the schools, they want to blame the district, they want to blame the teachers, and the last person they look and you listen to all the politicians, they're blaming each other on. We should get rid of this at the school board. We should do something different here. All these different things. At the end of the day, nobody says, "Hey, parents, look in the mirror. Maybe you have some responsibility here. Maybe you got to step up your game and get more involved and ask more questions and be a part of those young kids." And because you probably have the most influence and the most responsibility. I mean, that's a heavy responsibility as a parent, and you're always feeling like,
I'd hope so.
Yeah, you would think. Like I always say, the jury's going to be out. We'll see how we turned out and what we did 40 years from now, how the kids turned out. But at the end of the day, parents should be looking in the mirror and not blaming everybody else either, right? And saying, hey, listen, it is the younger generation is the future, and they are the future, and they have to be thought of that. And we can't blame the social media, schools, everything else in society on, if the kids aren't turning out the way that we want them to turn out, or they're not learning the things that we hope or developing the skills that we hope that they develop. It's our responsibility as parents to look in the mirror and say, hey, I got to probably do something different instead of saying it's everybody else's fault.
Yeah. I think there's a few things come to mind, and I try to talk about this, although I have more to say about it in subsequent books and things on the Substack, but, for one, if your default position as a millennial parent was to hand your iPad to a toddler or a young kid, then I don't think you have a lot of ground to stand on as far as like any sort of criticism for what has happened with society or the development of kids in that way. But I don't think that, because of this lack of generational knowledge that's occurred, I think kind of since the baby boomers, I'm selfish. I am selfish. Like I said, I have a dollar sign tattooed on my chest because of objectivism. Not that I'm a capital O card carrying objectivist fan. It's just that like that resonated with me. It's a reminder. It's my reminder to myself that I am selfish, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's inherently bad. It just means that it needs to be modulated in some way. And I think legacy is something that people forgot wasn't just about like having a Corvette in the garage of your 2.5, story house that was in a decent suburb. Like legacy is going to be whether anybody gives a damn that, you were in their life. Did you literally pass knowledge on to somebody and help you exist beyond your own span of your life? Like that's legacy to me. And not being concerned about what you're going to get from grandpa's house when he passes away or something like that. That's not what I'm talking about. And I think that we optimize for, I don't know that we know what we optimize for. I think that's a part of the code of the West, and the framework that I'm advocating for is like, just know why you are what you are. Because even if you're a jerk and you're a bully, I'm not saying that I want to hang out with you, but I'd at least respect you if you knew that was what you had decided you were going to be. It just breaks my heart and also frustrates me to know that there are people who don't think that they're that and wouldn't have chosen that for themselves, and probably still wouldn't choose it for themselves if they understood that they actually weren't nice people to other humans.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it sounds like we're advocating for self-awareness, right? And understanding, hey, listen, I understand who I am, what I am. I'm going to, either own it or change it. One of the two.
Yeah.
And you should always own it. And if you don't like it, change it. Right. And it at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
But it all so much spills out from that, though, when you think about it. When you just think of self-awareness, it's like, okay, self-awareness means that you don't think that you're better than you actually are if you're assessing what your skill set is. That means, well, I probably shouldn't overpromise and underdeliver if I don't know as much as I wish I did. Okay, well, how do I get better at this thing? It becomes this sort of like snowball where it's like, just that's the cheat code, is like, just be self-aware and don't if you can basically keep yourself from just making stuff up about yourself, you're going to go pretty far.
Yeah, I love, and that is the cheat code, and it never ends, right? It never stops. It's the game that there's never an end until we're done.
Right? It is a game, though. I don't know how you see it. I see it as a game.
I 100% see it as a game. In fact, I talk about a lot of things as a game, right? And even investing, I say the game, of short-term rental investing. I get kicked back all the time. Oh, this is really serious business. The fact that you refer to it as a game, I'm like, it is a game. I mean, it's a game we're all trying to navigate and play. The game of life, right? And all of these things that you're talking about, that's what we're doing, and that's how I visualize it. And some people
100%
agree or don't agree, but it is what it is. Well, Chris, this has been an awesome conversation, man. It's really fun to kind of just jam out on this stuff a little bit and riff on a couple of different things. I think I really want to hear your feedback. You gotta hit me back up on Instagram.
Oh, I will read it for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's no question. I will read that.
I'm always curious on the feedback on that kind of stuff, but I think it's a very, very interesting book, and I think you'll find it really interesting. My kids, it's one that I make them. We listen to it, probably every 6 to 8 months together.
Oh, wow.
And like in our car drives or something like that. I think it's that impactful, but it is, you'll find it interesting because of everything that you're about and what you're doing and what you're, the message and the skill set you're trying to impart in people, and at least, or the thoughts, I guess, that you're just trying you're trying to provoke thought for people, just thought provoking ideas of how do I navigate this whole game. And so, awesome, man. Well, listen, where can people find more of you? Where do they digest more of this? How do they get? I mean, I went and got my code a while back on Amazon, but where do you want people to go?
I would say just go to @thecode_of_the_West on Instagram right now. It's the best hub for things that will get you connected to the website, which is mostly just a store. Although there are some free things on there, some I've got a lead generator it's an ebook that's just sort of like trying to help people walk through how to build their own code from like sort of an epistemological standpoint. And so there's just things that I think actually have value that people can find on there. But there's a Substack there. I have a YouTube, which will hopefully accelerate this year once I'm basically just clearing bandwidth right now. And I would say there's not a lot on there yet. So you can be mindful of the fact that like there's YouTube, there's Substack, which does have quite a bit of substance, but everything kind of links through the Instagram. So I think that's probably the best entry point in right now.
Love it. And I'm on there all the time. I repost your stories pretty much daily.
I appreciate that.
We repost on my stories every single day. I repost your post on their stories. So we're trying to, it resonates with us and I like it. And so I repost it. And so you guys will post that link in the show notes as well, you guys that are listening. And so we'll wrap it up today. You guys listening, we know how valuable your time is. We appreciate you spending it with us and listening to all these conversations.
Thank you.
I hope you guys get as much out of it as I do. I know personally I get a lot out of these conversations. And so I know our listeners do as well on these episodes of Experts Corner. And so at the end of every episode, you guys, I ask you two favors. The first one is we don't run ads or sponsorships. The only way this show grows is if you guys share it. And if you know other people that would like to be a part of these conversations, share the show. If you got more than 30 seconds, like it or review it on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. And the final, most important thing I ask you at the end of every episode, pick that one thing you can do today to start building that life you don't want to take a vacation from. Cheers, my friends.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website? Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodacy.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.